In the heart of a forgotten city in America, where the wind carried dust more than dreams, a young black orphan named Kendi wandered the streets. He was no older than 10, born in the red soil of Africa, but brought by fate to a land that never felt like home. His skin was dark as night, his eyes wide with wonder, and his hands stained with cheap paint always. He lived in the shadows of abandoned buildings, slept beneath broken ceilings, and woke to the sound of sirens instead of lullabies. While the world hurried past him, Kendi slowed down. He watched everything, the way the sky shifted colors at dawn, the way old people limped through cracked sidewalks, the way no one ever looked down to see the boy with the brush. Kendi had no family, no name on any record, no school, no shoes, no place to be. But he had a wall. One wall behind an old bakery where rats slept at night and birds perched at dawn. It was his world. It was where he painted everything he could not say. With a brush missing half its bristles and paint left over from garbage cans, Kendi painted stars that never faded, trees that bent with kindness, eyes that looked at him with love he had never known. His paintings told stories, not of pain, but of what he hoped life could be. Because hope was the only thing he had never lost. People walked by. Some frowned, some ignored. Some even cursed the colors as trash. But he kept going, every day, every night. He painted even when his fingers froze, even when hunger clawed at his stomach. The wall was not just paint. It was the only part of the city that listened to him, that no one knew his name. Not even the bakery owner whose back door he leaned on for warmth. Yet the wall knew him well. It carried his dreams like prayers. And though the world was deaf to his silence, the wall remembered every brushstroke. Then came the day when Kendi painted something different. He climbed higher on broken crates, shaking with each step, and painted a door. Not just any door. A golden one, tall and glowing, with light spilling from beneath it. Around it, he painted faces, smiling faces of people who looked like him, arms wide open. Above the door, he wrote a word. Tomorrow. It was the first time he had written anything on the wall, and as he finished, as the final line of gold dried beneath the sun, a car parked nearby. Sleek, black, clean, something this neighborhood had never welcomed before. A man stepped out, tall, rich, alone. He didn't speak. He just stood in front of the wall, eyes fixed on the door Kendi had just finished. And the boy, too tired to care, too hungry to move, curled under the wall and slept with paint still wet on his hands. He had no idea that for the first time in his life, someone had truly seen him. Mr. Thorne Langston was a man who never stopped moving. Every hour of his life was measured in millions, in meetings, in decisions that shook entire cities. But that morning, for reasons he couldn't explain, he took a wrong turn. A left instead of a right, a pause instead of a rush. And it led him to a back alley with peeling bricks, rotting bins, and a wall that made him forget the world. He stood in silence, staring. It wasn't the skill of the painting that froze him in place. It was the soul behind it. The colors were uneven, the lines imperfect, but the message clear. A golden door, hope, tomorrow, painted not by a hand trained in art, but by a soul desperate to be heard. He looked down. There, curled beneath the mural like an afterthought the world had discarded, lay a boy. His clothes were tattered, too thin for the cold, his body small and unmoving, his face pressed against a brick. And in his fingers, still clutched like a final prayer, was a broken brush. Mr. Langston didn't know what he was feeling. He had walked through galleries that cost more than buildings. He had shaken hands with artists known around the globe. But none of them had ever made him feel this, a pressure in his chest, a silence that swallowed sound. He didn't leave. Not yet. He stood there while the city behind him moved on. Honks, shouts, smoke, and yet he remained. watching this child sleep like a discarded angel beside a masterpiece no one else would ever notice. For hours, he didn't move. He watched as people passed by the wall without even turning their heads. Watched as a woman dumped a bag of trash near the boy's feet. Watched as a group of boys laughed and kicked an old can toward the mural. But no one saw what he saw. Number 1 felt what he felt. By late afternoon, the boy stirred. But before he opened his eyes, he reached for the wall. His hand, slow and shaking, touched the golden door as if to remind himself it was still there. As if to say, even if the world remains cruel, this door, this dream was real. Mr. Langston took a step back. He didn't speak. He didn't call out. He simply turned and walked to his car. Not because he wanted to leave, but because he knew. He had to return, but not as a stranger. Not as a silent witness. He would return not to observe, but to change something. That night, Kendi woke alone again. The alley was the same. The mural was still wet, but something in the air had shifted. Something unseen, but powerful, and miles away, in the tallest building in the city, Mr. Langston sat in his dark office, staring not at spreadsheets, but at a photo he had taken of the mural, the golden door, the child under it, the word above, tomorrow. And in that silence, something deep within him began to break. The next morning arrived with wind sharp enough to sting skin. The city roared to life as usual, with taxis blaring horns, people rushing with coffee in hand, and cold concrete swallowing the feet of the forgotten. But Kendi was already awake. He hadn't really slept. Hunger had kept him company through the night, and so had the feeling that something was different. He returned to the wall, as he did every morning. His hands were stiff, his stomach empty, but his soul, strangely, felt fuller. He dipped his fingers into the leftover paint and continued from where he had left, off just beneath the golden door. He painted a staircase now. Each step rising carefully, almost cautiously, toward a sky made not of blue but of light. A light he had never seen, only imagined. He had no paintbrush left. The one he held yesterday had snapped in two. So now he used his fingers, dipping, dabbing, smearing, and still. No one watched, but high above, in a warm office filled with wealth and silence, Mr. Langston stared at the photo of the mural again. He couldn't look away. Something about it pulled him, almost as if the wall itself had called out to him after all these years of feeling numb. He didn't understand it. He only knew he couldn't ignore it. For the first time in his adult life, Mr. Langston cleared his schedule. No meetings, no calls, no press. He changed into simple clothes, nothing tailored, nothing loud, and drove alone. Back to the alley. Back to the wall. Kendi was still painting when he arrived. His clothes were even more torn today, his body thinner. But his eyes burned with something pure, something strong. His fingers were covered in paint, his breath shallow, but he worked. With the focus of someone saving their own life with every color. Mr. Langston didn't speak. He watched from a distance again, leaning against the same wall that held the mural. He noticed something. Kendi wasn't painting for attention. He wasn't painting for money or food or applause. He was painting because he had to. Because that wall was the only place he could exist without being erased. And then it happened. Kendi stood back, hands trembling, and stared at the staircase he had just painted. His face, tight with sadness, suddenly softened. And though no one else saw it, Mr. Langston did. Tears fell down the boy's cheeks, silently, not from pain, not from fear, but from the weight of being invisible for too long. Mr. Langston felt his throat tighten. He had built skyscrapers, signed billion-dollar deals, stood in rooms where people waited for his approval. But none of that had made him feel what he felt. Now shame and awe. All from a child who had nothing but paint and a wall. He left again, quietly, but not to forget. He returned to his office and did something no one expected. He opened a blank page on his computer and wrote one sentence: "Find the child who paints tomorrow." Then he made calls. Not to investors, but to people who could help. Quietly, without fanfare, without noise. Because this story didn't need headlines, it needed hands. Real ones. Back in the alley, Kendi curled up again beneath his mural. He had finished the staircase, but he had no idea someone, somewhere, had just begun building one for him too. The city remained blind to him. The rush of life drowned the quiet heartbeat of a child painting in an alley. Kendi had finished his staircase. Now he began to paint skies, bright ones, not gray. Birds with golden wings. A sun that glowed like fire, not smoke. He had never seen such skies in real life. But his soul remembered them, maybe from another life. Or maybe from dreams. His fingers were swollen, cracked, cold, that he hadn't eaten for 2 days. A moldy piece of bread he found behind the dumpster yesterday had done little. But his hunger was no longer just in his stomach. It had moved to his bones, to his heart. A hunger not for food, but for change. Yet still, he painted. In another part of the city, Mr. Langston's life began to bend. He had always been a man of decisions, sharp, fast, final. But now he hesitated. His thoughts returned again and again to the mural, to the boy. He found himself sketching the golden door on napkins, on the corner of reports. Even in the margins of his leather notebook. Something had broken open inside him. Something he had sealed shut for decades. And so, on a quiet morning, he made a choice no one understood. He walked into one of the largest art galleries in the city, not to view but to donate an entire section of the space. He requested that the walls remain raw, not white, that the lights be warm, not harsh, and that no artist names be listed. Only one phrase was to hang above the display: painted by those who dream, not those who are seen. He didn't mention the boy. Not yet. But in his chest, a plan had begun. Quiet, careful, sacred. Back in the alley, something strange happened. Kendi returned one morning to find new paint, neatly stacked. Not flashy, not new, but clean, safe, real. Brushes too, soft ones. And a folded gray blanket placed gently against the wall. No note. No footprints. Nothing. He looked around. No one. The bakery door was still closed. The streets still busy. But someone had seen him. Someone had reached out without saying a word. Kendi hesitated, then picked up a brush. For the first time, he held something that didn't fall apart in his hands. The bristles moved like wind against the wall. The colors poured smoother, deeper. And he painted like he had never painted before. He painted a city, not the one around him, but the one he wished existed. With windows open, with doors unlocked, with hands extended, instead of fists raised. The mural was no longer just a message. It was a movement. People began to slow down as they passed. A mother paused with her child. A bus driver honked, not in anger, but in greeting. Even an old man leaned on his cane and nodded quietly. Something was shifting, Kendi noticed. But he said nothing, because he knew the wall was speaking for him now, and far away, in a private room filled with blueprints and blank spaces. Mr. Langston circled a spot on a city map. An empty lot, surrounded by broken buildings, forgotten by developers. And he whispered, alone in the quiet, "This is where his gallery will rise." The alley had changed. Not overnight, not loudly, but slowly, like winter giving way to spring. The trash that once piled near the wall was gone. Someone had swept the ground. The bakery door now opened earlier than usual. Even the stray cat that used to hiss at Kendi now curled beside him as he painted. Kendi noticed all of it, but never said a word. He simply kept painting. Each morning, new colors appeared. Sometimes in sealed cans, sometimes in small jars. brushes of every size, a roll of paper towels, gloves, even water in clean plastic bottles, but never a name, never a face. Only silence. And kindness. He didn't ask questions. He just created. His wall grew taller, wider. His hands learned to blend colors he once feared. He began painting more people who looked like him. Children laughing, mothers holding babies, fathers walking without fear. He painted joy he had never lived, yet somehow understood, and pain he had lived, but now transformed into light. People began to gather, not in crowds, but in respect. A girl on her way to school stopped each day to stare. A man who once drank on that corner now watched with folded arms, his bottle untouched. Even police officers began to slow their cars, no longer suspicious, just curious. Kendi never looked for praise. He still slept under the same gray blanket, still ate what scraps he could find. But something had changed. For the first time in his life, the city wasn't pushing him away. It was leaning in, and somewhere above, in a boardroom with high windows and floors of polished stone, Mr. Langston met with architects, not to build another luxury tower, but something humble, real, a center made of brick and glass filled with walls, blank ones, waiting. He called it the Tomorrow Room, a place not for the rich, not for the powerful, but for dreamers. Children who had nothing, yet painted everything. No one would be turned away. No name required, just hands, just color, just heart. But he didn't tell anyone who inspired it. He hadn't even met the boy. Yet he wanted the child to come on his own, when he was ready. When his heart told him that the world might finally be safe enough to knock on a new door. And so, he waited. Each morning, he checked for updates from his quiet team. Men and women. He trusted to work silently, kindly, without flashing lights. They told him the alley was alive now, that more children were watching, that paint was spreading, not just on the wall, but in the hearts of those passing by. Then one rainy evening something happened. A storm rolled through the city, hard and fast. Wind tore through alleyways, water soaked the mural. Paint dripped. The golden door faded, the staircase blurred. Birds lost their wings, and Kendi stood in the rain. He watched his dreams dissolve, one color at a time. Powerless, helpless, just a boy again, in the storm. Nothing in his hands, nothing in his pockets. Only a ruined wall and a heart too tired to cry. He dropped his brush and walked away from the mural for the first time. The morning after the storm was quieter than usual. Streets were still wet. Leaves clung to curbs. The city moved slower, as if mourning something it didn't understand. In the alley, the wall stood damaged, bruised, bleeding color. The staircase Kendi had painted was almost gone. The golden door, once radiant, now looked dull. Patches of gray and brown streaked across what used to be sunlight and wings. The storm hadn't just washed away paint. It had torn through the one place in the world where a child had dared to dream. But Kendi didn't return that day. He didn't return the next, either. No new paint cans appeared. No brushes, no quiet footsteps or silent hands. The alley, once alive with silent hope, fell back into stillness. But the wall wasn't forgotten. People still passed by, slower now. They paused longer. A woman wept quietly in front of what remained. A teacher brought her students to see what used to be there. A boy stood with his hands pressed to the brick, as if trying to feel what had been lost. And in the tallest room of the tallest building, Mr. Langston received the news. The mural was gone, and so was the child. He stood in front of the large window, watching the gray clouds settle over the city. For the first time since he had seen that golden door, he felt helpless. Not because he lacked power, but because this one thing, this one boy, had slipped beyond his reach. And so, the man who had waited long enough finally stepped forward. He returned to the alley. No driver, no bodyguard, no press, just him. In plain clothes, under the low, weeping sky, he stood before the broken mural. Then he walked to the wall and with trembling fingers picked up a brush left behind, soggy, broken, forgotten. He dipped it in a small puddle of paint that had survived. White, faint, barely there. And he painted a line. One thin, slow line. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't perfect. But it was something. A beginning. Passers-by stopped, stared. A few whispered. But he didn't care. He painted a second line. Then a third. Then a shape. It looked like nothing at first. Just streaks. Until he stepped back. It was the outline of a door. Not golden, not grand, but present. Above it, he painted a single word. Still. Still here, still waiting, still believing, somewhere. On the other side of the city, in a tunnel beneath a freeway, Kendi sat curled against the cold stone wall, his hands empty, his eyes wide open. Something deep in his chest stirred. A pull. A weight. A whisper. And he stood up. The city didn't notice when he left the tunnel. No one stopped to ask where he was going. No one questioned the boy with bare feet and paint-stained hands as he crossed intersections and alleyways. But something guided Kendi, not sound. Not sight. Just a feeling, like a soft hand on his back, pushing him gently home. He reached the alley at sunrise. The light was low, pale orange. The ground still damp. The wall stood as he had left it. Damaged, cracked, broken. But now it was different. Someone had painted. Kendi stepped closer. The brushstrokes were rough, unfamiliar, but honest. A door stood once again, faint but firm. And above it, a single word. Still. His heart paused. He looked down. At the base of the wall, placed neatly on folded cloth, sat fresh brushes. New paint. And next to them, a pair of shoes. Soft, simple, just his size. Kendi didn't move at first. He simply stood there, staring at what the world had never given him before. Not charity. Not pity, but dignity. Quiet. Waiting. Real. He sat slowly, picked up a brush, opened a can of paint. And with slow, steady movements, began again. Not over, but forward. He didn't fix the old door. He built a new one. Beside it, he painted another staircase, higher, stronger. The steps glowed like firelight. They rose not just toward a better sky, but through it. And above everything, he painted a face, not his own, but one filled with joy, with peace, with light. The alley came alive again. People returned. But this time, something had changed. A crew arrived, quiet men with gentle hands. They cleaned the walls, but left the art untouched. Others brought warm food and didn't ask questions. They simply left it near the wall, as if placing offerings at a sacred place. And then came the invitation. A note, handwritten, placed carefully inside a sealed folder. It found its way into Kendi's hands without noise. Inside, a sketch. A building. Made of red brick and glass. Wide open walls. Sunlight everywhere. At the top, engraved in soft lettering, the Tomorrow Room. A place for artists without names. A home for stories without sound. A future that once seemed impossible. Beside the sketch was an address and a letter, just one sentence. Your walls belong to the world now. Let us build them with you. Kendi looked up. For the first time he stood not as a boy in rags, but as a builder of something new. He folded the paper, placed it near his heart, and turned to finish the mural, this time. Not alone, because the world had finally seen him. And now it was listening.